What is up, everybody? Waifu Belector here, the only fair human on earth, and today we're here to talk about a brand new game. Another Xbox game, if you can believe it. I'm talking about South of Midnight, a game developed by Compulsion Games, the same studio that made We Happy Few way back in the day, almost a decade ago, if you remember We Happy Few at all. It's not a game I played personally, but I have played South of Midnight, so let's talk about that. And I realize this game isn't on everybody's radar, but I see that as more of a reason to talk about it rather than a deterrent. But there are those who may be a little bit interested but want a better idea of what they'll be in for. So sit back, relax, and I'll tell you a little of what's good about it, what's bad about it, and what are just the indifferent facts about it. Remember, if you end up enjoying, to give the video a like and consider subscribing. Thanks in advance. Let's do this. So, South of Midnight is an action-adventure game that takes place in the American Deep South. You play as a girl named Hazel who goes on an adventure to find her mom after she's swept away in a hurricane. But of course, Hazel discovers that she's something called a Weaver and has magical powers. And so there becomes this whole family mystery along the way. Anyway, that's a super short synopsis of the general setup for the game. And I'll say, the game starts off interesting, though maybe a tad slow in the gameplay. The characterizations and lore are almost immediately enjoyable and intriguing, but the pace that the gameplay is rolled out to you is sorta slow to begin with. It's not that it's unenjoyable, it just tutorializes the combat for a touch longer than is necessary. But let's talk about the combat. This isn't an open world game or anything, it's a very linear game, and at most there are just a couple of optional walkways or slightly hidden routes to gain a few more skill points. So because of the linearity, as you might imagine, combat is arena based, meaning you enter an area, the enemies appear, and you're locked in until they're defeated. Pretty standard action game stuff, really. But that phrase, pretty standard action game stuff, can also be applied to the combat itself, not just the setup. Because in truth, nothing special is happening as far as combat goes. You have a standard attack combo, you can dodge, and a perfect dodge will hit enemies with a burst of damage. And you can stun enemies or pull them toward you. And both of those abilities, the pull and the stun, are cooldown based. But as the game goes on, you can get a couple more options like an air slam and a couple of big charge attacks. All of this is perfectly fine, it just isn't hugely enjoyable combat. And the available tools, while serviceable, aren't the most exciting in comparison to lots of other action games. There aren't a bunch of crazy strung together combos or anything like that. So while it's good, decent gameplay, I just think it lacks a bit of flash and pizzazz, you know? The same can be said for the enemy designs as well, really. They're kinda just forgettable generic corruption enemies. But funnily enough, that's not true for the game's bosses, which are all very on brand, on theme, and are memorable to the gameplay and narrative. But I do just want to reiterate that the combat isn't bad. It's just more so the bare minimum of what action game combat needs to be decent and not much else. It also doesn't help that there aren't a ton of enemy types either. Still, the decent combat is parsed out and peppered throughout the game appropriately. You never get super sick of it because they're not overdoing it, but they also aren't starving you for it in a way that makes you bored and wonder, when is something gonna happen? So ultimately, the combat is a nice but unremarkable part of the game. It adds variety, it adds something to do, and it's the biggest part of this game that makes it a game, you know? But still, it's just okay at best. Now, of course, attached to this is the vehicle and context for all the combat, that is the story. And yeah. This game's got a good one. Like I said, it pretty much comes out of the gate with charming characterizations and intriguing mystery. And it really doesn't let up. As the game went on, I only got more invested in what was happening. I will say the tone can be pretty bleak at times, but it's actually really amazing because it's bleak in a way that doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like the characters are being portrayed in a horrible, bleak world where the writers were just obsessed with world trying to legitimize the seriousness of their story through an overabundance of hyperbolic drama and darkness. No, the world in South of Midnight feels more tempered. And as fantastical as it is, it kind of feels grounded in that it comes off as a world with good and bad. And it doesn't shy away from the extent of the bad when it gets there. So that's kind of where the bleakness can come in. But at the same time, this isn't the kind of world or story that revels in darkness to be fake deep, you know? There's good, bad, and in between happening in a way that feels natural and will have you invested. Even the game's vibe shifts are pretty fluid and natural. Things can go from being a gallivanting, banjo-twanging adventure to being genuinely spooky in a way that doesn't feel out of place or abrupt. I really just felt myself highly engaged by the story, and it only increased over time. And for me, this game only had a runtime of about 9 hours, so fairly short and sweet by gaming standards, and it seems to be with good reason. Everything both in the narrative and gameplay seems very intentional and is paced very well for the most part. And it flows in a way that would make it really easy to play from front to back in a single session. I mean, I beat this game over the course of 2 days personally. It's very easy to play. And I don't mean easy in a gameplay difficulty sense, I just mean enjoyable and presented in a way that feels encouraging of continuation. Even lore notes that you find out in the world, the font and structuring of them are incredibly inviting in a way that makes you want to actually read them. They don't feel like, oh geez, time to read in the middle of my gaming. You know, where you're like, look at all those words, I'm not doing that. The game is aware that it is a game, and it doesn't ask you to read a novel in order to get some extra lore. And honestly, I know this is by design because the lore notes in this game are a little more intertwined with the main story than a lot of other games. So I think the devs really want you to read them. And mission accomplished if you ask me, because I was reading most of them. Now the whole game is paced well, as I said, and that's about 95% of the time. The end of the game does feel a little rushed to the finish. It feels like they were pressed for dev time, and the ending isn't bad. I actually kind of like the ending. And minor spoiler here, but it kind of feels like there was a big boss fight that didn't happen. And what I'm about to say doesn't spoil the story in any way, but the final boss ends up being just an endurance boss, where you fight waves of enemies back to back rather than one big boss. Yeah, I just don't know, because I do like the way the game ended, but it just kind of felt too fast and sped up near the finish line. But, you know, regardless, this game just has a really good narrative going. Great performances from the cast, the characters and world are really good, just an overall really good story. And you throw that story on top of what is admittedly just decent combat mixed with some light platforming, and you get something that just barely creeps over the threshold to qualify as above average. So if I had to put a number on it, it felt like a very soft 7.5 out of 10. It barely gets beyond a 7 for me, but with everything factored in, I think it does reach that extra half a point. But yeah, you know what? I wouldn't mind seeing a follow-up. A South of Midnight 2 with better, more compelling combat could be elite. But you know, alright, that's it from me, I think. There are just some thoughts on South of Midnight. If you're interested in the game, it's out now, available for purchase or on Game Pass. I encourage you to check it out. If you've played it, let me know what you think of it. Drop whatever comments you've got. Remember to give this video a like if you enjoyed, and maybe even subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. But even if you don't, thanks just for watching, and until next time, I am Waifu Belector. I am just a normal guy. I like hentai, and I enjoyed South of Midnight. Goodbye.